Do you think silence in a family says more than shouting?
Imagine scraping together every penny imaginable for your child's one real shot at survival only to discover that your own parents, the very people who raised you, declare with unwavering certainty that your sister's extravagant celebration takes absolute precedence over any medical intervention that might extend your little boy's precious life. A revelation so profoundly shattering that it reshapes your entire understanding of loyalty and sacrifice within the family unit. And as the years unfold with deliberate slowness, the intricate web of resentment you weave culminates in a moment of silent retribution, so cleverly orchestrated that it leaves everyone involved questioning the true cost of their past indulgences. So if tales of betrayal laced with the sharp edge of eventual payback resonate with you, especially those drawn from the gritty realities of American family dynamics, where healthcare bills loom like storm clouds and wedding extravagances sparkle under false pretenses, then settle in, because this personal odyssey of mine will grip you tightly right up until that final, ambiguous close that lingers in your thoughts long after the words fade. My name is Sarah Thompson, and if someone had told me back in 2012 that the ordinary rhythm of my life in that unassuming suburb just outside Chicago would fracture irreparably because of a decision rooted in favoritism so blatant it bordered on cruelty, I might have dismissed it as the plot of some melodramatic television series designed to tug at heartstrings without ever delving into the raw, unrelenting pain of real existence. Yet there I was at the age of 32. Balancing my role as a dedicated nurse's aide at the bustling local hospital with the joys and challenges of marriage to Tom, who spent his days elbow-deep in engine grease at the neighborhood dealership, and above all nurturing our vibrant 5-year-old son Ethan, whose boundless energy and infectious laughter could transform even the dreariest rainy afternoon into an epic quest, using nothing more than an oversized cardboard box and a vivid imagination fueled by stories of far-off adventures. Everything seemed solidly grounded in that comforting routine of school runs, weekend barbecues with neighbors, and quiet evenings where Tom and I would collapse on the worn couch after putting Ethan to bed, discussing dreams of saving for a family vacation or perhaps upgrading to a slightly larger home someday. But then the subtle signs began to emerge, those nagging headaches that struck Ethan with sudden intensity during playtime or dinner, which we initially attributed to the typical whims of a growing child adjusting to the demands of kindergarten, brushing them off with over-the-counter remedies and assurances from pediatricians that such episodes were common and fleeting in young boys full of curiosity and motion. As the frequency of these headaches escalated into something far more ominous, transforming innocent games into moments of distress where Ethan would clutch his head and curl up on the living room floor, we finally escalated our concerns to a series of specialist appointments that unraveled our world with clinical precision, revealing a rare and aggressively progressing brain tumor that demanded immediate attention through surgical intervention, which might only stabilize the condition, temporarily followed by an experimental treatment program available at a renowned facility out in California, a protocol promising a fighting chance at remission, but carrying an exorbitant price tag of $85,000, the bulk of which our modest insurance policy refused to cover beyond a frustratingly inadequate cap that left us staring at a financial abyss we could scarcely comprehend in our middle-class existence, where every paycheck was meticulously allocated to mortgages, groceries, and the occasional treat like a family outing to the county fair. In the midst of this escalating crisis, as I paced the confines of our cramped kitchen late into the night with the phone clutched tightly in my trembling hand, dialing the familiar number of my parents' spacious home 2 hours away in the rolling hills of Indiana, where they had retired comfortably after decades of steady manufacturing jobs, I poured out my desperation in a voice laced with the raw vulnerability of a mother witnessing her child's vitality slip away, pleading with them for any form of assistance that could bridge the gap between despair and possibility, emphasizing how this was not just about money but about preserving the light in Ethan's eyes that had always brought joy to our family gatherings despite the undercurrents of favoritism that had long simmered between my younger sister Emily and me, with her receiving the scholarships, the new vehicles at milestones, and the unwavering parental support that I had learned to navigate around through scholarships and part-time jobs during my community college years. The pause on the other end of the line stretched into an eternity before my father's voice, gruff and measured as always, delivered the blow that would echo through my subsequent years like a persistent thunder. Explaining with a tone that brooked no argument that their resources were currently stretched thin due to the impending wedding of Emily, my sister 8 years my junior, who had always been the golden child in their eyes, an event they described in glowing terms as costing $230,000, encompassing everything from the opulent venue in the countryside to the custom-designed gown, the elaborate floral arrangements imported from exotic locales, and a guest list swelling with distant relatives and business associates of her fiancé Jake, a charismatic real estate developer whose polished demeanor masked the superficiality that would later become all too apparent. And in that moment, as Tom's supportive hand rested on my shoulder while I struggled to process the prioritization of lace invitations and multi-course banquets over the experimental drugs that could potentially save Ethan's life, a wave of disbelief washed over me, mingled with the first stirrings of a profound resentment that would evolve into the foundation of my quiet rebellion against the inequities of blood ties. The ensuing weeks dissolved into a haze of relentless hospital vigils, community fundraisers that included heartfelt bake sales at our local church and earnest online campaigns shared across social media platforms, which garnered sympathetic donations totaling perhaps $2,000 from kind-hearted friends and acquaintances, who rallied around our plight, compelling me to relinquish my shifts at the hospital entirely so I could remain by Ethan's side under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, where his small hand grew increasingly limp in mine as the tumor's advance mocked our every effort to hold on. Driven by a mounting sense of urgency and isolation after Tom, overwhelmed by the mounting pressures and our escalating arguments over dwindling finances and fading hopes, announced one fateful evening that he could no longer bear witness to my unraveling and departed with a hastily packed suitcase to start anew with a coworker from the dealership, leaving me to confront the mounting medical decisions alone in the sterile corridors. I made the impulsive choice to drive through the night to my parents' home, arriving unannounced and pounding on their polished front door until my mother appeared. Her appearance impeccably composed, as if preparing for one of her cherished garden club luncheons, complete with makeup that concealed any trace of familial concern. And as I demanded through streaming tears that they reconsider their stance and offer even a fraction of the support they so freely extended to Emily's matrimonial fantasies, my father emerged from the shadows of the hallway with arms folded across his chest in that familiar posture of unyielding resolve, reiterating with cold finality that weddings represented a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for happiness that could not be postponed or diminished. Unlike the uncertainties of medical outcomes, which he dismissed with a wave of practicality that cut deeper than any scalpel. Storming away from that encounter with my heart pounding in rhythmic fury against the confines of my chest, I caught a glimpse through the open doorway of a towering stack of embossed invitations on their entry table, each one emblazoned with elegant gold script proclaiming "Forever Love" for Emily and Jake's union. An image that ignited within me a sardonic chuckle born of disbelief at the skewed priorities that valued ephemeral celebrations over enduring legacies, and as I accelerated away from their driveway with tires screeching on the pavement, my phone vibrated insistently with a text from my mother inviting me to Emily's upcoming bridal shower, as if such social obligations could coexist with the life-or-death drama unfolding in my world. A gesture so tone-deaf that it planted the seed of what would become my methodical unraveling of their carefully curated facade, hinting at the intricate revenges yet to come that would test the boundaries of forgiveness and retribution in ways none of us could have anticipated. Those bridal shower invitations arrived in my mailbox with relentless persistence, each one arriving like an unwelcome intruder wrapped in pastel envelopes adorned with delicate ribbons and embossed details that screamed extravagance, while I navigated the harrowing labyrinth of Ethan's deteriorating health, ignoring them at first in favor of the more pressing demands of coordinating with oncologists and coordinating care that consumed every waking moment and left me emotionally and physically depleted in ways that made social pretenses feel like absurd distractions from the gravity of my reality, yet a volatile mix of curiosity intertwined with the budding seeds of spite compelled me to make an appearance at the event itself. Choosing to drive to the upscale country club venue where the air hung heavy with the scents of fresh orchids and gourmet hors d'oeuvres, arriving in my faded jeans paired with a hoodie that still carried the faint, unmistakable odor of hospital disinfectants. And stale coffee from endless night shifts, only to witness Emily gliding through the crowd like an untouchable figure from a fairy tale. Her recent gown fittings evident in her poised elegance as she effusively described the intricacies of her upcoming honeymoon itinerary complete with private beach villas and sunset cruises. All while my mother enveloped her in a warm embrace and my father seamlessly handled the tab for the lavish open bar stocked with premium liquors that flowed freely among guests who chatted idly about color schemes and seating charts, their interactions with me limited to a perfunctory nod of acknowledgement before they drifted back into whispers about the logistical stresses of orchestrating such a grand affair. A level of stress that paled in comparison to the soul-crushing weight I carried daily as I held Ethan's hand through chemotherapy sessions that left him pale and listless under the unforgiving hospital lights. The full weight of their refusal crystallized in a confrontation that erupted just a week following that superficial gathering. When I placed yet another desperate call to my parents after receiving the devastating confirmation from the medical team that the tumor had advanced beyond the point where standard interventions could offer more than palliative relief, my voice breaking with unfiltered pleas as I suggested they might liquidate assets like the recreational boat they cherished or dip into the savings they had meticulously built over years of frugal living to provide even a portion of the funds needed for that experimental protocol, which represented Ethan's last viable pathway to survival, only to be met with my father's heavy sigh reverberating through the connection like a final verdict, as he explained with a practicality that bordered on indifference that such measures were impossible given the non-refundable deposits already secured, with the wedding caterers amounting to $20,000 for an array of seafood delicacies and prime cuts prepared by celebrity chefs, underscoring once again how Emily deserved this pinnacle of joy and stability in her life, without the complications of financial reallocations that might tarnish the occasion's perfection. In the immediate aftermath of that conversation, I hurled the phone across the room where it clattered against the wall before sliding to the linoleum floor, unleashing a guttural scream into the folds of a throw pillow to muffle the sound from the attentive nurses stationed just outside Ethan's room, a release that did little to alleviate the churning vortex of anger and helplessness that threatened to consume me entirely as Tom, already fraying under the relentless strain of our circumstances, chose that very night to confess his inability to endure the spectacle of my gradual emotional disintegration and departed our home with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, revealing in hushed tones that he had begun seeing a coworker from the dealership as a means of escape from the suffocating atmosphere of debt and despair that had infiltrated every corner of our marriage. Left to shoulder the unbearable burden in solitude, I navigated the final stages of Ethan's illness with a mechanical determination that masked the profound grief building within, signing the necessary consent forms for comfort care measures alone in the dimly lit consultation room where the doctor's sympathetic explanations blurred into white noise, and when Ethan ultimately slipped away on an ordinary Tuesday morning, his parting words emerging in a faint, sleep-laden murmur of "love you, Mommy," that pierced my heart more sharply than any medical prognosis ever could, I arranged a modest burial beneath a simple granite marker in the serene churchyard cemetery, forgoing any elaborate ceremonies in favor of a private farewell attended only by a handful of close colleagues and neighbors who offered quiet support without the fanfare that my family seemed to reserve exclusively for celebrations of milestone events. The grief that followed reshaped me from the inside out, prompting me to sell our modest family home in a swift transaction that barely covered the outstanding medical debts and relocate to a compact one-bedroom apartment in the heart of the city, where the constant hum of urban life provided a distracting backdrop to my double Shifts at a new urban clinic specializing in outpatient services, a position that demanded precision and empathy even as I rebuilt my fractured existence brick by brick through rigorous budgeting and the gradual severance of ties with those who had failed me most profoundly. Communication with my family dwindled to intermittent echoes, my mother's voicemail messages laced with platitudes about collective healing and familial reconciliation. My father's occasional mailed checks for a mere $100 that I methodically tore into confetti and discarded without response, their efforts appearing increasingly hollow against the backdrop of the wedding festivities that unfolded in full splendor as documented through a barrage of social media updates featuring Emily resplendent in her custom white gown, Jake standing tall and beaming beside her, the entire production radiating the glossy allure of $230,000 invested in fleeting moments of apparent bliss. On a particularly desolate evening spent alone in my sparsely furnished living room with a lukewarm beer in hand as a solitary indulgence after a grueling 12-hour shift, I scrolled through those digital mementos involuntarily, a hollow laugh escaping my lips at the sight of their jubilant toasts captured in high definition against backdrops of twinkling string lights and overflowing champagne flutes, a sound that carried the weight of bitter irony as I contemplated how they reveled in manufactured happiness, while my own world had contracted to the dimensions of loss and endurance without their intervention. Then, unexpectedly, a bulky package materialized on my doorstep the following afternoon, bearing the return address of the wedding photographer and containing a professionally framed photograph from the reception hall depicting my entire family arrayed in harmonious smiles, with Emily at the center like a triumphant queen, accompanied by a handwritten note from her expressing regret over my absence, while attaching a USB drive loaded with honeymoon snapshots showing the couple lounging indolently on pristine Hawaiian beaches with tropical cocktails raised in perpetual celebration. Her words casually remarking on how life proved too fleeting not to seize every opportunity for joy, a sentiment that ignited a sharper edge to my earlier laughter as I retrieved a utility lighter from the cluttered kitchen drawer and methodically applied its flame to the edge of the framed image, observing with a detached satisfaction as their collective grins distorted and charred within the porcelain basin of the sink, the acrid smoke rising in tendrils that symbolized my burgeoning resolve to excise their influence from my narrative entirely. As the remnants cooled into innocuous ash, my cell phone illuminated with an incoming call from an unfamiliar number traced back to Emily's newly established post-wedding life, the persistent ringing evoking a mix of apprehension and anticipation about whatever fresh layer of entitlement or obliviousness she intended to unveil next, leaving me poised on the precipice of deciding whether to engage or perpetuate the silence that had become my most potent form of resistance. As the insistent ringing from that unfamiliar number persisted into the quiet of my apartment, echoing off the bare walls that had become both sanctuary and prison in the wake of Ethan's loss and the subsequent disintegration of my marriage, I allowed the call to divert to voicemail without lifting a finger, a deliberate choice that extended the pattern of detachment I had cultivated over the intervening months as a shield against the intrusive reminders of a family whose priorities had revealed themselves in the starkest possible terms. Choosing instead to immerse myself in the monotonous yet grounding routine of my expanded work hours at the clinic, where the steady influx of patients provided a tangible sense of purpose amid the abstract void left by personal tragedies, gradually transforming the raw edges of my grief into a more manageable undercurrent that surfaced in quiet moments like the annual pilgrimage to Ethan's gravesite, where I would place a bouquet of simple daisies and whisper updates on the small victories I had achieved in his memory, such as paying off the last remnants of our medical debt through overtime bonuses and frugal living that eschewed luxuries in favor of financial security. Fast-forwarding through the relentless passage of 7 years that reshaped me from a shattered young mother into a 40-year-old woman who now oversaw the billing department at the same urban clinic with an efficiency born of necessity and hard-won expertise, I found myself residing in a comfortable 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of the suburbs where the mortgage payments felt like badges of independence rather than burdens, driving a reliable if unremarkable SUV purchased outright with Savings accumulated from meticulous budgeting and even entertaining the occasional date with professionals who shared my pragmatic outlook on life, though none managed to breach the fortified boundaries I had erected around my heart to prevent the recurrence of vulnerabilities that had once led to such profound betrayals. In this evolved existence, the specter of my family receded into occasional digital detritus. Blocked numbers that occasionally attempted reconnection through secondary channels like emails from distant cousins or mutual acquaintances who unwittingly served as conduits for updates on the Thompson clan, painting a picture of Emily's marriage that began as a glossy facade of perpetual vacations and social media boasts, but gradually cracked under the weight of undisclosed strains, such as Jake's unexpected layoff from the real estate firm amid a market downturn that forced them to downsize their lifestyle, while Emily continued her pattern of indulgent spending on boutique shopping sprees and wellness retreats that strained their joint finances to the breaking point. Yet beneath this veneer of stability, the embers of resentment continued to smolder, occasionally flaring into petty acts of retribution that provided fleeting catharsis without derailing my progress. Like the time when my mother's longtime friend from the church back in Indiana reached out via a shared contact list inquiring if I intended to contribute to her upcoming birthday celebration, prompting me to respond anonymously with a forwarded article detailing the pitfalls of overly lavish weddings that often led to familial financial ruin, accompanied by a subtle note observing how certain choices echoed through generations in unexpected ways. A maneuver that elicited a wry internal amusement at the thought of my mother furrowing her brow over the implications during what should have been a joyous occasion. Harmless enough on the surface, but laced with the satisfaction of planting seeds of discomfort in the soil of their self-congratulatory narrative. Life propelled forward with incremental triumphs, a promotion that came with a modest raise allowing me to fund a community scholarship in Ethan's name for families facing medical hardships, or the side consulting gigs I took on for smaller practices navigating the complexities of insurance reimbursements, turning the very system that had once failed me into a tool for empowerment that resonated with the resilience I had forged through adversity, even as audiences reflecting on my journey might inwardly debate the merits of my unyielding stance, urging a softening of edges toward reconciliation with aging parents who after all shared my bloodline, yet every recollection of their decisive no during those critical hours echoed like a mantra reinforcing the wisdom of self-preservation over obligatory forgiveness that could invite further exploitation. The subtle unraveling of Emily's idyllic post-wedding life became more apparent through fragmented reports funneled via that one cousin I had tentatively unblocked for neutral exchanges, describing heated arguments over mounting credit card balances accrued from her insatiable appetite for status symbols like designer handbags and exclusive spa treatments, culminating in Jake's frustration boiling over into separation proceedings that exposed the fragility of a union built more on spectacle than substance, while my parents, having co-signed loans to support Emily's early marital indulgences, watched their retirement nest egg erode under the dual assault of poor investment decisions and unforeseen medical issues for my father, a twist of irony given his historical emphasis on fiscal prudence that now left them scrambling in ways that mirrored the desperation I had once pleaded to alleviate. This undercurrent of schadenfreude gained sharper focus during an ordinary errand to the local grocery store where I maneuvered my cart through the aisles stocked with everyday essentials, only to collide gently with an old neighbor from my Indiana upbringing who, upon recognizing me after all these years, launched into a sympathetic recounting of the hardships befalling my family, detailing how my father's pension had suffered a catastrophic hit from volatile market fluctuations tied to the economic shifts following the real estate bubble's burst, Emily's divorce finalized amid accusations of financial irresponsibility that saw her relinquishing assets she had once flaunted, and my mother resorting to parting with heirloom jewelry at pawnshops to cover basic utilities in their downsized living situation. Revelations that washed over me like a potent elixir blending vindication with a reluctant pang of recognition that their current predicaments stemmed directly from the very excesses they had championed over my son's survival. Nodding along with feigned neutrality as I loaded produce into bags, I absorbed these details with an internal machinery whirring to life. Contemplating how the $230,000 poured into tulle arches and gourmet feasts had sown the seeds of their present discomfort. A dynamic shift that positioned me not as the perpetual supplicant, but as the one holding unseen leverage in any potential future interactions. That evening, as a steady rain drummed against the windows of my home while I settled into the routine of reviewing quarterly reports under the soft glow of a desk lamp, the landline reserved for professional emergencies pierced the tranquility with its shrill tone, displaying an incoming call from an Indiana area code that I instinctively recognized as originating from my parents' region despite the years of imposed silence, and upon answering with a guarded hello, my father's voice emerged, hesitant and laced with an uncharacteristic tremor that spoke volumes about the erosion of his former confidence, uttering my name followed by a tentative request to converse about matters that had grown dire in their household, a plea that hung in the air pregnant with unspoken admissions of regret and necessity. My finger hovered over the receiver's end button as his words trailed into explanations of mounting bills and lost stability, the power reversal sending a thrill through me that I savored in silent deliberation before pressing down mid-sentence, the abrupt disconnection resonating like the turning of a long-awaited key in a lock long rusted shut, leaving me to ponder whether this overture marked the beginning of their determined pursuit or merely another fleeting echo in the vast silence I had masterfully maintained. The abrupt termination of that phone call with my father lingered in the air of my home like the faint residue of smoke from an extinguished candle, a deliberate act of severance that provided a momentary surge of empowerment amid the swirling undercurrents of unresolved emotions I had long suppressed in favor of constructing a life untainted by the toxic dynamics of my familial past, prompting me in the days that followed to delve deeper into the fragmented records of their unraveling through a combination of public online searches and the sporadic emails that had accumulated in a dedicated folder I maintained for monitoring purposes without ever responding, each message serving as a window into the progressive erosion of the stability they had once wielded so confidently over my pleas for help during Ethan's crisis. Flashbacks to the immediate aftermath of the wedding ceremony itself resurfaced with vivid clarity during these investigative sessions, recalling how Emily had basked in the afterglow of her nuptials by announcing plans for a lavish vow renewal just a year later aboard a luxury cruise liner that promised exotic ports of call and onboard entertainment funded by yet another infusion of parental generosity totaling $10,000 for the booking alone, an extravagance they justified as a necessary affirmation of marital commitment despite the early signs of strain in Jake's career trajectory that hinted at impending financial pressures, while I, ensconced in my solitary apartment, had chosen to acknowledge the invitation with a seemingly innocuous fruit basket delivery accompanied by a card inscribed with the wry observation that their subsequent celebrations might prove as enduringly sweet as the initial festivities, a touch of ironic humor that masked the deeper intent to subtly underscore the superficiality of their priorities without escalating to outright confrontation at that fragile stage of my recovery. As these recollections intertwined with the more recent disclosures gleaned from creditor notices and divorce filings accessible through county records, a comprehensive picture emerged of Emily's post-wedding trajectory marked by escalating indulgences that accelerated the family's downward spiral, including her compulsive acquisitions of high-end fashion items and wellness packages that ballooned their joint credit lines to unsustainable levels even as Jake grappled with professional setbacks in the volatile real estate sector, leading to a separation process fraught with legal entanglements where she ultimately surrendered possession of assets she had previously paraded as symbols of success, such as the upscale condominium purchased shortly after the honeymoon. Now facing foreclosure proceedings that rippled outward to implicate my parents who had extended their signatures as guarantors on multiple loans intended to bolster Emily's vision of an aspirational lifestyle, thereby depleting the retirement funds they had assiduously accumulated over decades of disciplined saving in preparation for a leisurely post-work existence that now appeared increasingly illusory. My mother's communications, filtered through that neutral cousin's forwardings, revealed glimpses of their mounting regrets in the form of terse updates about parting with sentimental items like grandmother's pearl necklace at local auction houses to offset utility bills in their relocated rental property. While my father's health had deteriorated following a workplace accident in his part-time consulting role that qualified him for disability benefits insufficient to cover the comprehensive medical care he required, an ironic parallel to the experimental treatments they had deemed too risky and costly for Ethan years prior, evoking in me a blend of vindictive satisfaction and a reluctant acknowledgement of the human frailty underlying their past intransigence that complicated the neat narrative of retribution I had mentally constructed. This growing awareness fueled a calculated escalation in my subtle interventions, culminating in the discovery of an outstanding debt collection notice pertaining to one of Emily's long-standing credit accounts that had evaded resolution amid the divorce chaos, inspiring me to place an anonymous telephone inquiry with the agency under the guise of a concerned associate, providing just enough contextual details about the Thompson family's current vulnerabilities in Indiana to encourage a proactive follow-up visit without implicating myself directly. A maneuver laced with the light vulgarity of poetic justice that amused me inwardly as I envisioned the discomfort of unexpected knocks at their door mirroring the unheeded pleas I had once directed toward them, watching from the distant vantage of my stable life as the consequences of their favoritism manifested in tangible encroachments upon their daily routines. Yet, even as this mini-revenge unfolded with the precision of a well-timed chess move, internal conflicts arose that might give pause to those observing my choices, prompting debates over whether such orchestrated discomfort toward one's aging progenitors crossed into the realm of unnecessary cruelty rather than deserved accountability, especially when subtle clues in my father's truncated voicemail, references to old mistakes weighing heavy, and pleas for a chance to explain, hinted at a potential depth of remorse that could humanize their narrative and challenge my resolve to maintain absolute boundaries. The uncertainty amplified as Emily attempted reconnection through a sporadically used secondary text number, her message a rambling entreaty about life's harsh reversals and the enduring bonds of sisterhood that warranted temporary shelter in my home. A proposition I contemplated deleting outright but instead archived for leverage, recognizing the hypocrisy in her invocation of family after years of radio silence punctuated only by boasts of material triumphs, all while the broader family grapevine buzzed with whispers of their collective desperation that positioned me as the unlikely fulcrum in a teetering balance of power. Tensions reached a fever pitch on a particularly overcast Friday evening when, after a day spent immersed in patient file reviews and administrative consultations that demanded unwavering focus, I retreated to the warmth of my living room with a steaming mug of herbal tea to unwind amid the patter of impending rain against the windows, only for the sharp chime of the doorbell to shatter the solitude with an urgency that suggested more than a mere delivery, compelling me to approach the entryway cautiously and peer through the reinforced peephole into the gathering dusk, where silhouettes of two familiar figures huddled under a shared umbrella, their postures conveying a mix of determination and defeat as the first drops of the storm began to descend, leaving me with a pounding heart and a hand frozen on the doorknob, deliberating in that suspended instant whether to grant entry to the ghosts of unresolved grievances or reinforce the fortress I had so painstakingly built against their return. With the insistent chime of the doorbell reverberating through the confines of my living room like an unwelcome summons from a chapter one had long since closed in the book of my life, I approached the entryway with a deliberate slowness that allowed the gathering storm outside to underscore the dramatic tension building within me, peering through the peephole to confirm the identities of the drenched figures huddled on my porch under a flimsy umbrella that offered scant protection against the relentless downpour, their faces illuminated intermittently by flashes of lightning that revealed the etched lines of age and hardship absent from the polished images of their wedding-era glory. My mother's tentative smile faltering under the weight of uncertainty, while my father leaned heavily on his cane with a posture that conveyed both frailty and an unyielding hope for reconciliation that clashed violently with the fortress of resolve I had erected over the years. The muffled cadence of my mother's voice filtered through the door panels, calling out my name with a familiarity that felt intrusive after the imposed silence, pleading for entry into the warmth of my home where they imagined perhaps a cup of coffee and an opportunity to unburden the accumulated regrets that had driven them through the rain-slicked highways from Indiana. A journey that must have taken hours in their aging sedan, now likely sputtering from neglect due to the financial constraints they had brought upon themselves through a cascade of poor choices centered on Emily's insatiable demands for opulence. My hand rested on the doorknob, fingers curling around the cool metal as a torrent of memories flooded my consciousness, the sterile hospital rooms where Ethan's labored breaths had filled the air, the curt telephone refusals that prioritized taffeta and tiered cakes over life-saving infusions, and the solitary path I had forged through grief's labyrinth to emerge with a stability they now sought to infiltrate, compelling me to unlatch the chain with the barest fraction of movement that allowed the door to swing open just an inch, permitting the chill gusts and the scent of wet earth to invade the threshold while their eyes widened in a mixture of relief and apprehension at this minimal concession to their presence. "Sarah, thank God," my father interjected with a voice gravelly from disuse or perhaps the emotional strain of the drive, launching into an explanation laced with admissions that hung heavy in the humid air, detailing how Emily's life had spiraled into disarray following the divorce that stripped her of the luxuries she had come to expect as her birthright, leaving her temporarily residing in a modest shelter on the outskirts of their town where the realities of eviction notices and unpaid bills had finally pierced the bubble of entitlement they had collectively nurtured. While their own situation had deteriorated to the point of losing the family home to foreclosure proceedings accelerated by the very loans they had co-signed in blind support of her matrimonial dreams, now compounded by my father's ongoing disability claims that barely covered prescription costs in a healthcare system as unforgiving as the one that had crushed me years ago. My mother nodded vigorously beside him, her worn coat dripping rivulets onto the welcome mat as she extended a tentative hand through the narrow opening, her words tumbling forth in a rush about how they had reflected deeply on the old mistakes that had fractured our bonds, referencing the $85,000 they could have redirected from the wedding budget to aid Ethan, but instead funneled into celebrations that now seemed hollow and regrettable in hindsight, a confession delivered with tears mingling on her cheeks with the rain that evoked a flicker of sympathy within me, tempered immediately by the recollection of her composed demeanor during my desperate visits when such reflections were nowhere to be found. In that suspended moment, as lightning cracked overhead illuminating the desperation in their eyes, a subtle twist emerged when my father mentioned an unexpected letter from Emily enclosed in his coat pocket, intended as a gesture of familial outreach that detailed her remorse for the years of obliviousness, and a plea for mediation through me, a development that introduced a dilemma forcing me to confront whether this collective vulnerability warranted a bridge across the chasm or merely highlighted the cyclical nature of their dependencies that had always fallen on others to resolve. The internal conflict raged as I held the door steady against the wind's insistent push, part of me, the resilient survivor who had rebuilt without their shadow, reveling in the witty culmination of my long-brewed revenge not through vitriolic outbursts or dramatic expulsions, but in the profound power of unwavering silence that mirrored the dismissals they had once extended to me, allowing their words to dissipate unanswered into the storm while I observed the gradual crumbling of their forced smiles into expressions of dawning realization that no amount of explanation could retroactively mend the irreparable damage inflicted upon my world, a form of retribution so elegantly understated that it carried the light vulgarity of turning their own tool of indifference against them in a manner that satisfied the deeper yearnings for justice without descending into the chaos they deserved yet might provoke unnecessary entanglements in my ordered existence. Listeners to this tale might find themselves at odds with my unyielding choice, advocating for the compassion due to elders weathered by time and consequence, arguing that a shared pot of tea and an earnest dialogue could foster healing rather than perpetuate isolation. especially when the subtle clues of genuine contrition in my father's trembling voice and my mother's outstretched hand suggested a potential for redemption that humanized their flaws beyond the caricature of favoritism I had painted in my mind. Yet the vivid image of Ethan's final peaceful expression anchored my decision, reminding me that any concession would dilute the sanctity of the boundaries I had earned through solitary endurance, and that true closure resided not in verbal reckonings, but in the quiet assertion of self-worth that refused to entertain their narrative on my terms. Stepping back incrementally with my gaze locked onto theirs in a steady, wordless appraisal that conveyed volumes of the unresolved pain and the hard-fought autonomy I now embodied, I permitted the door to ease shut with a gentle finality that resonated louder than any slammed barrier, the click of the latch echoing through the hallway as their knocks transitioned from fervent to faltering against the onslaught of rain, their silhouettes retreating eventually into the obscurity of the night as I turned away to reclaim the solitude of my living room where the steaming tea awaited untouched, heart steady in the knowledge that this act represented not merely vengeance, but the ultimate reclamation of agency over a story they had once dictated. In the ensuing quiet, as the storm subsided into a rhythmic patter against the roof, I pondered the ambiguities that lingered like unanswered echoes. Whether their departure marked the definitive end to intrusions or the prelude to further attempts at intrusion, if Emily's letter held truths that could alter perceptions of her role in our fractured saga, and ultimately if my path of emotional exile offered true liberation or merely a different form of confinement that isolated me from the complexities of human connection, questions that swirled without resolution as I settled into the evening's routine. The closed door standing as both sentinel and symbol of the enduring uncertainties that define the intricate tapestries of family legacies in the American heartland, where dreams of unity often collide with the harsh realities of individual survival.